pleased to have John Battles from UC Berkeley moderating this panel. John is one of the scientists who leads a group of scientists that advises the task force. Everything we work to do is science-based. And so, John, thank you for all that you do, and looking forward to this panel.
How fast can we move?
Come on in, guys.
I'm going to lay it out in the manner that you guys are presenting. He's here. He's out there. Thank you.
You want me to do the other package too?
Actually, they can probably scoot over. We'll scoot over everybody. Spots.
Scoot over one.
I think it's in the order of speaking. No worries. A nice jacket on. You're making me.
And we're coming up here to speak.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so you can see your slides.
All right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We're rotating through.
Yeah. That way you can. So I'll try and step out of the way.
Thank you.
Good.
Oh, sure. No close on the presentation when you hit your last slide.
Yeah, I can leave it. Yeah,
Just leave it. I'll jump. Oh, thank you.
Oh, you have them all. They're all stacked. Oh, I think
They're not on. They're on
separate
separate
presentations.
presentations.
Okay. So you're going to come in between each one of the speakers?
Oh, no, definitely. Everything on your
Okay, yeah.
presentation.
Okay, so I'm giving you guys each 5 minutes.
All right, John.
I'll let you know 1 minute.
All right, well, thank you, Wade, for the opportunity to come share our work. But I did hear the groans. I heard the groans. People are thinking, oh no, here comes a boring 45-minute science lecture. We're really going to try not to do that today. I've learned from my colleague and co-chair, Dr. Steve Astoria, director of the USDA Climate Hub, that science needs to lead to solutions. And I am convinced that we know enough to take decisive action. And like many of you here today, I assume all of you here today, I can hardly bear it to see another forest ruined, another community broken, another firefighter hurt or killed. We are all in, hearts and minds, on this effort to treat 1 million acres. Our question and our goal is to try and answer the question, how? California is a big state, diverse ecosystems, and even more diverse communities. While we share common challenges, the solutions are going to vary by regions. The priorities for the Fire Safe Council of San Diego County are going to be different from a mountain town in the Sierra Nevada. We need to conserve all of our fire-prone ecosystems, from conifer forests to oak woodlands to chaparral, and the strategies will have to vary with these ecosystems. And we have to assure that both the burdens and benefits of our efforts are equitably shared. So we need to build on programs like the Federal Tribal Partnership up in Six Rivers National Forest, where all voices are heard and all people are included. Some of these challenges, so we're going to roll these regional kits out, as you heard from Patrick, region by region, and we're going to start with the Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada faces challenges that we've heard that are common across the state, and we see this staggering rise in both the extent of wildfire and the severity of wildfire. This picture here is from 2021 Creek Fire. This is a high-severity burn patch, and unfortunately, I had lots of other examples I could have chosen from over the last couple of years. Coupled with this, we're also facing this phenomenon of hotter droughts. Droughts are part of the California climate for millennia, but what we're seeing today is this coupling of a lack of precipitation and higher temperatures. We experienced a hotter drought in 2012, 2016, and we saw the consequences of that, and we're facing that today. We're in another hotter drought right now, And not only are there direct effects on water supply and forest health, but these hot droughts also accelerate the risk of wildfires. So what are we trying to do? So we've gathered together scientists and project developers from across government, across universities, and the private sector, and we want to try and pull together all of the relevant information for each region and make it useful. Part of that are these regional profiles that Patrick mentioned. These are summaries of the current conditions, both ecological and social, in the region. They're based on the best available scientific information, as well as the perspectives of the stakeholders in the region. And so we did both surveys and interviews and asked people, what are the important priorities for you? And for example, in the Sierra Nevada region, some of these priorities included resilient and fire-safe communities, reliable water supply, and biodiversity conservation. So our goal, in summary, is to pull this information together to help reach these priorities. We want to speed this transition from our forests of today to both safe and resilient forests. So here's the outline. Here's the speaker lineup we're going to go through today. We're going to take this in turn and describe the different parts of it. And with that, I want to hand it over to the next speaker, Dr. Ella Telham from California Air Resources Board.
Thanks, John. So yes, I'm Alan Telhelm. I'm from the California Air Resources Board. I'm here largely in my capacity as the co-chair of the Task Force Monitoring, Reporting, and Assessment Work Group. So one of the mandates or tasks given to the Monitoring, Reporting, Assessment Work Group is the development of a tracking system to show us as state where are all the projects happening on the ground, where is the work going on. And I want to give you a quick refresher on this. We've talked about this in a couple of previous meetings, but for those of you who weren't there, this tracking system tracks planned, active, and completed projects statewide. It includes forests, grasslands, and shrublands, so we're not just talking about forests. There are a lot of different ecosystems within California that can burn. We want to understand work that's happening in all of them. And we cover about 50 different activities that are part of this tracking system. And to just give you an idea of sort of how it's structured, at one scale, we're talking about treatments. Those treatments are spatial. They're a polygon you can look at on the map. They're maybe delineating a watershed or a fuel break, some feature outside on the landscape. In order to complete a treatment, maybe something like a fuels reduction treatment, you may have to do multiple activities. So maybe you're going to do a thinning, and maybe you're going to follow that up by some piling, and then maybe on top of that, you're going to do a broadcast burn in order to make that treatment happen and make it complete. So I'm going to give you a little bit of snapshot of where we are with this tracking system and what some of the projects that are recently completed and planned just for the Sierra Nevada region, the Sierra Cascades Inyo region. So here are some of the numbers that we have so far. So this represents data over the last couple of years. It differs a little bit between the federal government and the state government in terms of the time period in which we're tracking this information. Sort of in the biggest bucket of forest health and fuels reduction projects, there have been about 415,000 acres of work in this region over the last couple of years. Much of this is mechanical and hand fuels reduction, so things like thinning, mastication, that type of work. A lot of it is also beneficial fire, so this is prescribed fire and also this is prescribed fire. We know we have some data gaps around things like land protection, so putting in conservation easements, acquiring land for biodiversity, or so that we can manage it and create buffers around our vulnerable communities. We also know we have a data gap around watershed and habitat improvement that's happening around the state. There have been about 25,000 acres of tree planting for a total of about 560,000 acres over these last couple of years. Here's a different version of this, or sort of a different presentation of this. So this is a heat map showing where in the Sierra Nevada work has been done since July 2020 to present. I'll note that it does not include any natural ignition wildfire acres that can have resource benefit. So low severity wildfires are not included here. You can see that a lot of this work has been distributed or is distributed in the northern part of the state. From Tahoe, sort of working up towards the Plumas area and up towards Shasta and Lassen. We know that we have some gaps here, as I identified before, that we're missing some of the ecological restoration data and some conservation activity. We know we don't have data yet on private timber harvest. That's a substantial amount of work. We also don't yet have tribal data and local government data integrated into our system. We have goals and aspirations for building that stuff into our system. We're starting to work on pulling those types of data in, but this is where we're at right now, and you can see spatially where things are happening in the state. And I believe now I'm going to pass it to my colleague at CAL FIRE, Tadashi Moody.
Thank you, Ellen. Again, I'm Tadashi Moody. I'm with the Fire and Resource Assessment Program at CAL FIRE. I'm going to talk a little bit today about alignment, the word that you heard Patrick use. That's so important in collaboration and cooperation amongst groups. So we all know that groups, as you heard Secretary Crowfoot say, have this tendency to work in silos, whether it's academia versus management, state versus federal agencies, local versus regional types of groups. Even within agencies and groups, we have these certain silos that we want to tend to work in. But really a core tenet of the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force is this idea that we can't get to 1 million acres, we can't get to forest resilience and community resilience in these silos. We have to be working together across boundaries and across agencies. So, and additionally, we can't effectively plan or evaluate our successes across boundaries and organizations if we're all looking at different maps and different data sources. So there's this need to identify and agree upon scientifically robust and management relevant metrics that can be used across agencies and boundaries. Once we agree on these metrics, they don't have to be the only things that we look at. We need to evaluate the data sources behind those metrics. What's the best available science that we can find for a given metric, whether it's carbon or fire hazard or wildlife. And these don't have to be the only data sources that we look at, but what is the best available science? And by doing this collaboratively, we can build a common understanding of conditions and trends and resources, again, across the boundaries and amongst stakeholders and groups. And importantly, we can use this common understanding to help encourage interagency cooperation, to prioritize work where we need it, and to ultimately get work done on the ground in places that makes a difference. So one example of alignment has been an effort that started maybe 6 or 8 months ago between CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service, Pacific Southwest Research Station. And this effort was trying to look at the metrics that CAL FIRE uses, some of the metrics that CAL FIRE uses. In particular, my group, FRAP, does a periodic resource assessment. The last one was in 2017, and the next one is underway right now and should be released in 2023. And we look at status and trends in different resources across the state. Concurrently, while we're doing that, the Forest Service has been working on this Excel project, which you'll hear a bit about. And that project was also geared around identifying metrics and data sources that can support planning across large areas. And so in this particular effort, we looked at where are these things aligning? Where is the coincidence between what we're looking at in CAL FIRE and what the federal folks are looking at as well? But that fed into a larger effort called the Interagency Science Team. And that's been a team that was brought together to work towards alignment and common metrics and data sources for planning. The group includes federal, state, and university scientists with input from a diversity of agencies and institutions that can provide feedback and tell us where things are useful or could be more useful. We're working on providing data for 4 different regions, starting with the Sierra Nevada, which you'll hear about today, and then rotating around the state. And this is what we're calling the regional resource kits, and Pat Manley is going to talk about those more in depth in just a moment. But I wanted to say that, these are some base data that we want to, provide, so we're all speaking this common language between agencies and groups and local and regional planning efforts. So this is some data that we can all look at together. but it's not static, right? This data, we know it's just changing all the time, so we want to make sure that we're updating that data frequently and making sure that it's current. And the metrics that we look at are not necessarily going to be the same for every region. A resource kit for the Southern California region may be different from what we put together for the Sierra Nevada. And one last point I'll make about the resource kits is that these are intended to be information and data for regional planning, so we can look at the region in the same, we can compare apples to apples across a large area, do that landscape scale planning that we're talking about. But none of these data products are going to supersede any kind of regulatory products like, for example, fire hazard severity zone maps, which are also being updated right at this particular moment. So with that, I will pass it off to Pat Manley to talk about the Sierra Nevada Regional Resource Kit.
Thank you, Tadashi. I'm Pat Manley with the Pacific Southwest Research Station Forest Service, and happy to be here today. John, Alan, and Tadashi all touched on a fundamental point, that high-quality information, broadly available, covering all lands, is really key to increasing the pace and scale of forest restoration across the state. That is precisely the objective of these regional resource kits, to take planning to the next level by leveraging advances in resource mapping and modeling to support regional scale planning. So I'll now walk you through what is in the Sierra Nevada Resource Kit, talk a bit about what we're already learning from these data, and how anyone can access them. There we go. So what are the resource kits? They're a digital package of mapped data and supporting documentation that it's intended to provide regional planners, collaboratives, and partners with core information for conducting assessments and planning projects. The regional resource kits are organized based on the framework for socio-ecological resilience, also referenced in the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan that's been mentioned earlier. The framework provides a scientifically sound structure for organizing data about forested landscapes and assessing their condition. The framework consists of 10 pillars that span the spectrum of ecological, social, and economic conditions that are fundamental and interdependent components of all forested landscapes. Each pillar consists of 1 to 3 elements that represent primary aspects of each pillar. And finally, the metrics are what represent actual conditions on the ground. The Sierra Nevada Resource Kit has 30 different metrics distributed among the 10 pillars and their elements. The metric data layers come from a variety of best available, high-quality information covering all lands, information that's relevant to managers and partners, and the ability to update those data on a regular basis. So now let's take a look at those data layers. I won't have time to show you all of the metrics. So for a few of the pillars, I'll show some of the maps of the individual metrics and how we combine them to represent overall conditions. And then for the remaining pillars, show you these composite maps, but talk about the metrics that go into them and what these data and maps represent in terms of conditions. So let's start with the fire dynamics pillar. Fire is a natural part of these forested ecosystems. Frequent low-severity fire was common historically and continues to play an important role in maintaining resilient forests. On the left is the fire return interval metric. In other words, how frequently has a location burned over the past 100 years compared to historical frequencies prior to widespread fire suppression. The dark areas indicate where fires have not burned as frequently as they did historically, and where using fire as a management tool would have multiple benefits. The second metric in the middle is annual burn probability, or how likely is it that a fire will occur. These are modeled estimates based on where and how fires started in the past. And these are generated by the Pyrologics Group, a research group out of Missoula, Montana. The dark areas are where it is most likely for fires to start, and they are generally in the driest and more populated areas of the Sierra. The third metric is the probability of high severity fire, or how likely is it that a fire will burn so hot that it will kill most of the trees and will be difficult to put out. These are also modeled estimates by the Pyrologics Group, and the darker blue areas are more likely to burn at high severity. And these patterns generally coincide with where fires are likely to start, at mid to low elevations, and also near more populated areas. So on this slide, we see that the combination of those metrics evaluate the fire dynamics of the overall fire pillar. And we see that most of the state is at moderate to high risk of destructive fire, indicated by the yellow and red colors on the map. Clearly, large, high-severity fires will continue to shape our landscape, and strategic investments are needed to improve fire dynamics as quickly as possible. We also need to adapt to increasingly fire-prone landscapes, as we're all aware, which leads us to the fire-adapted communities pillar. Here, we are primarily focused on fire conditions in adjacent to communities and the degree to which those communities are prepared for fire. Two metrics represent fire-adapted communities. First, how fire is likely to burn if it occurs, and then how exposed an area is to the risk of fire. These data are also provided by this pyrologics group. This composite pillar map really helps us see how widespread the risk is to communities, both large and small, across the Sierra Nevada, indicated by the yellow and red coloration. Foothill communities, areas to the north and south of Lake Tahoe, and along Highway 49 are areas that are particularly stand out as vulnerable to impacts from fire. Of course, where fire comes, smoke emissions and impacts to air quality follow. Two metrics for the air quality pillar represent the potential for smoke emissions under different fire weather conditions, both moderate conditions and high. But this map really shows us how not where smoke is going, but where it's coming from. And this pillar representation shows that the potential for the worst emissions coincide with where forests are most prevalent and most dense in the mid to high elevation zones of the central and southern Sierra. On this next slide, we see, turn our attention to forest conditions overall. There are 7 metrics that represent forest conditions or forest resilience. Here we are going to look at 3 metrics that represent structure and composition. On the left is stand density index. This metric basically indicates the volume of live trees on the landscape. Each location in the landscape can only support so much living material based on available water, nutrients, and soil conditions. This map shows us that many of the forests are near their maximum capacity, indicated by the darker green color, which suggests that they are a potential risk of tree mortality from factors such as drought, insects, and disease. Next is forest maturity, or seral stage. It reflects the development of forest conditions over time. More mature and late seral forests are often a focus because they provide a wide variety of ecosystem services and require many decades to replace if they're lost. In mapping forest maturity, we use the average diameter of all trees as a proxy for stand age. And the dark blue areas indicate the location of the more mature forests, and they occur largely in the central and southern Sierra. On the right is large tree density. Large trees perform many functions in forest and for society, and there are fewer large trees today than there have been historically. Large trees occur throughout the more heavily forested areas in the Sierra Nevada, but the highest densities of large trees are limited to a subset of mature forests. So not all mature forests have these large trees. On the next slide, we see that this composite pillar representing all of those metrics, that forest resilience is pretty variable across the Sierra, and that most forests are in moderate condition, represented by the yellow and light green colors on this map. Where there are trees, there is carbon, and carbon sequestration on natural and working lands is an important contributor to reducing California's carbon footprint. Carbon sequestration is represented by 2 metrics. First, total carbon, which is how much wood is there above ground, live or dead, and how much wood is in big live trees, which together help us understand where we might concentrate efforts to retain carbon on the landscape. In the Sierra, we see that areas of higher and potentially more stable carbon are limited to relatively small areas in the mid-elevation ranges across the Sierra. Notably, nearly half the above-ground carbon in the Sierra Nevada is concentrated in just 20% of the landscape, making these areas important for meeting carbon conservation and sequestration objectives. Biodiversity conservation is characterized by 7 metrics in the resource kits These metrics shown here represent each of the 3 elements of biodiversity. On the left is black oak. It's one of the focal species, and it was selected for the kit because of its high cultural and ecological value. Areas where it is most likely to be a dominant species are indicated by the dark green and light green colors here, and are limited to the low and mid elevations along the western flank of the Sierra, particularly the north-central part of the range. Next, we have wildlife species richness, which is a measure of species diversity. And we can see that native species richness is quite variable across the Sierra. It's not closely associated necessarily with dense forests, as are many other metrics that we've seen in previous maps. Finally, on the right is habitat connectivity as a measure of community integrity. Habitat connectivity has an important role in sustaining populations of all species, and it is very likely to be affected by climate change and by fire. This map of habitat connectivity was provided by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it shows that high connectivity in brown is much more common in the southern Sierra, with the northern part of the range being more fragmented and less well connected. Overall, the biodiversity conservation pillar values are quite variable across the Sierra, with mid to high elevations generally being more diverse. Also, areas of the highest biodiversity, indicated by the dark green colors, occupy just about 1/5 of the landscape and indicate that these are areas that have high value for conservation of biodiversity. Water security. This pillar pertains to the quantity and quality of water for all purposes, both within forested landscapes and for landscapes and communities that depend on water from these landscapes. Water security is characterized by 2 metrics that reflect these 2 scales: site-based water availability and estimated water yields. We see that the majority of the Sierra has low water security, and that areas of high water security are limited to higher elevations along the crest of the Sierra, primarily associated with areas that have greater snowpack. The economic diversity pillar covers a wide array of important topic areas. The resource kit is currently limited to metrics that pertain to wood products. Shown here are 2 metrics: the availability of small diameter woody material, biomass, shown in the darker green areas, and the cost of moving that biomass from the forest to existing processing facilities. The red areas indicate higher costs. The combination of these metrics shows that nearly half of the Sierra Nevada has at least some potential for supporting a biomass market, and the Central Sierra appears to have the most favorable combination of supply and cost. In the Southern Sierra, cost appears to be the most limiting factor, which could potentially be addressed, for example, through investments in processing capacity. Finally, the socio-cultural well-being is paramount, and the label is missing, but I think you'll get the idea. Many factors affecting social and cultural well-being there's a wide variety of topics in there, but at the moment we are showing just economic well-being. We see the combination here of housing costs relative to income combined with unemployment rates, and these data are from Cal EPA. And we see the conditions are quite variable, with favorable conditions in dark green and unfavorable conditions in dark red, and those are peppered throughout the Sierra Nevada. However, the majority of the Sierra reflects an intermediate degree of economic stress. So hopefully this brief tour of what the resource kits has to offer has captured your imagination and motivated you all to get to know this data better and to really leverage the power of having all of these data in one place, all interoperable and covering all lands. These data are freely available through 2 portals. First, if you want to browse the data just to see what's there, you can do this through an ArcGIS online portal. And if you want to download the data, you can do that also through a geodata clearinghouse that is hosted by the US Forest Service. Links to these portals and supporting documentation for the data can be found on the task force website that will be up in the next few days. And we look forward to your feedback on how these data are helping you and suggestions for enhancing their value and utility. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Michelle Turner and Moja Shen to talk about an exciting new tool development by the Google org team.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everybody. I'm a product manager on the Google.org fellowship team, and I want to give you a quick overview of what we're doing today. I want to start out by just explaining what a Google.org fellowship actually is. This is a program inside of Google that embeds individual employees from across the company from various disciplines, from engineering, project management, design, product management, et cetera, to come together to work with nonprofits or civic agencies to build solutions together. And the goal of our fellowship is to work with the CNRA and the U.S. Forest Service on helping to better further the goal to achieve the 1 million acres a year of land to be managed. And so we're doing that through developing a new decision support tool that enables landscape scaled management and treatment prioritization. And we're doing that in conjunction with everything that Pat was just talking about around the regional resource kits. That's the data and metrics that will be used in this tool. So we want to make sure that this tool is available to help planners not just determine fire resilience, but also overall ecosystem health. And so it's going to rely on those metrics that lead up into the 10 pillars of resilience that Pat was just showing. So we did a ton of user research to kick off this program, and I think many of you out there actually may have been involved in some of this research, so thank you if you were. We identified 4 key pain points. The first was data, and the regional resource kits have gone a long way in solving those data problems. There were a couple of others that were outside the scope of of what we could handle. We decided to focus on prioritization, which came up as a big issue, as an area that we could focus on. And there were 4 key solution requirements as part of that. First, this tool had to be readily available and free to all users, free and open source. The second was that it needed to be based on sound, transparent science and data, as well as climate models. The third is it needed to be really easy for planners to use. It had to have a good user interface and super easy to facilitate modeling. And finally, it needed to support collaboration and sharing, both at the higher levels of the state and down to local planners. And as we looked at who the users would be for this tool, we really realized the best place for us to focus our efforts on was on the regional resource managers, folks that were trying to plan out hundreds of thousands to millions of acres. And we're faced with the task of looking at, I have to build new projects, and I also have to look at all these other projects that are happening on my landscape and really understand at a landscape level what's going to be going on with the land over time. And what we wanted to empower them with was the ability to not just protect communities, which is obviously top priority, but look at over time what's going to happen to the ecosystem through the treatments that are going on. And they're going to be able to see this through the new resource kits that are coming out. So what's happening to watersheds, what's happening to wildlife migrations, carbon sequestration, and job opportunities and recreational areas. So we're very excited to announce that we're building the Planscape Decision Support Tool. Planscape is being specifically designed to work with the new regional resource kits. It will be the planning tool that can be used for the resource kits. And we are going to be starting this off with the Sierra kits, but as those kits come online for the rest of the state, Planscape will be available to be used on those resource kits for the rest of the state as well. The tool is going to allow the planners to take all that great data that Pat was just showing you and start to model it, determining the impact on the metrics, and then be able to go in and say, if I change this metric a little bit, what's the overall impact to my landscape? And then to go in and look at multiple scenarios. So what's so unique, and in summary, what are we doing about Planscape? This is going to be a collaborative planning tool that's designed specifically, again, to work with the regional resource kits. It's open source and free to planners. It's building on existing state and federal science and tools. It's focusing on landscape scale solutions for the planners. And it's going to incorporate climate change constraints. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mojia Shen, and she's going to give you a demo of Planscape.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm glad I got to do the fun part. Hi, everyone. I'm Mojia. I'm also a product manager on the Google.org team. Before we dive into the demo, I just wanted to say that our team, we're constantly incorporating feedback from experts like you to make sure what we're building truly serve your needs. So at the end of this presentation, I'll be talking about how you'll be able to supply us with more feedback. We would love to hear them. Okay, so you might already have been part of our 2 foundational research share out, or even participated in our research so far. So our team, we know that we're new to the scene. We are not expert in the field, so we very much ground what we're doing based on all the feedback that we've been hearing. So in this demo, I'll be sharing how our product will be addressing some of the 6 top user needs we've heard so far. Okay, so before we dive into detailed requirements, let's talk about the lay of the land. So with this tool, there are 3 interconnected workflows. However, the user can choose to start anywhere. So the first workflow is called Explore. That lets user basically visualize any of the data set from the regional resource kit on the map. The second workflow is called Plan. That helps user prioritize areas for treatment. And the last one is called Evaluate. That helps user compare a couple projects against one another and find the most effective one to fund or to implement. So for the purpose of this demo, you're only seeing a map of the Tahoe Central Sierra region. Our first rollout will be available for the entire Sierra. And then as the resource kit becomes available elsewhere, we should be able to support those as well. All right, so let's take a closer look at the user needs we've heard so far. So the first one we've heard is, help me fill in my local knowledge gaps. We all know that local knowledge is extremely important and is helpful when it comes to planning for smaller pieces of land or doing planning for the next 1 to 5 years. And when it comes to planning for larger pieces of land or on private properties or doing longer term planning, user might benefit from additional data set. So in this case, with the plan, with the Explore workflow, you'll be able to select any data set from the regional resource kit and visualize them on the map, zoom in and out, and find what you need. The next one we've heard is that help me view the landscape holistically. We've heard that just doing planning based on one single criteria is not enough, like fire only. But incorporating a variety of ecological and socioeconomic factors is overwhelming. So as a result, we're partnering with scientists from UC, from Forest Service, a variety of scientists maybe in the audience, to come up with a score called treatment score that basically take advantage of the latest data from the resource kits as well as climate model to try to describe the health of the landscape. And highlight a couple areas that really need some attention. So this kind of gives some pointers to where to further dig into. User can also go into the tool to find out more about how the scientists come up with these scores. Next, we heard from users to see more up-to-date project information. So also as part of the Explore workflow, user will be able to see the up-to-date existing project information from CalMapper, as well as the latest status from the interagency tracking system that Alan has just presented on. Next, we've heard from users that they want help with finding the optimal solutions. We've heard that there are a lot of tools that provide heat maps without built-in analysis or optimization functions. And while there's so much land to treat, but there's limited resources and time, it's important that we find the project with the highest ROIs. So with the plan workflow, user will be able to select an area they're interested in putting some treatment, and then they can put in the management priorities. So a few criteria that they particularly care about. So for example, here I can put in some of the pillars that we just talked about, and you'll also be able to see more detail about these pillars as well, or specific metrics that you want to optimize for. And then you can put in some constraints. For example, I only have $300,000 budget available, and then our tool will be able to recommend a couple projects based on these. And then along with that, you can see the cost associated with it, and also their relative impact on the 10 pillars, along with the other few really important criteria that really helps with selecting the right project. Now let's say you're interested in seeing if you fine-tune some of the management priority criteria and see if it significantly impacts the outcome. You can actually create multiple scenarios, and then the tool will be able to generate impact based on these scenarios, and you can put it in front of your local constituents and make decisions collectively. So second to last, we heard from users to get help on evaluating projects objectively. So with the evaluate workflow, we're hoping that we could provide data set that help with criteria that are related to landscape scale context or natural resource benefits, where in no way wanted to replace or change how the evaluation framework are working today, but we want to help with faster, better decisions by providing additional data points. All right, so last but not least, we heard that land management is a massive collaboration effort. So we want to make sure that our users can collaborate with their colleagues and local planners and grantors. They can do that by sharing the project they've been working on with others to view and comment. They're also able to share them as a PDF or export as shapefiles to continue to work in their tool of choice. With that concludes our demo. And lastly, I just wanted to thank our partners for their generosity, for their patience working alongside us, educating us. It could not be possible without everyone who's involved here. And lastly, if you find what we're doing interesting, you want to provide us with written feedback or want to be part of our research or just want to be posted on what we're doing, you can head to planscape.org and sign up there. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Great, thank you. I just want to point out, here's our draft timeline. Again, we're going to have both the resource kits, the prioritization, and Planscape available sort of as the meetings come aboard. It's important, if you haven't gotten it already, that Planscape will be available early next year. We're just starting. In fact, this is a big launch for all of us. This is the first time we've pulled these resource kits together. They are a draft kit. We immediately let it go out, and we've already getting comments back on changes, on revisions, and we're open to that. These aren't finished products. And so we're really hoping to revise as we go. The same with the profile. We're hoping to get feedback and then make these living sort of working documents as we go forward. So with that, I'll open it up to questions from the executive committee.
Great. I think we need these mics. Yep. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that presentation. It's really, really impressive, the level of teamwork that happened, and thanks to google.org. One note for those several hundred people who are in the room or are joining online, because of the size of this discussion, we are focusing questions from the executive committee, but it's really important that we get, that the folks presenting here today hear feedback and input. So not only are they here today, but through the task force or through planscape.org, we can facilitate questions and input to them. I think I'll start off with a question for John or anybody on the panel, and that is, you all are distilling a ton of complexity here, right, to try to help optimize how these projects are happening. But if you're somebody who volunteers for a fire safe council, in a local community, if you're a local county supervisor, or you're somebody who's not, spending tens of or hundreds of hours in these complex metrics, how would you suggest that, these kind of voluntary toolkits be used to help accelerate the pace and scale of the work that needs to happen on wildfire resilience?
Yeah, well, I'll start with that. I think, that's exactly what we're trying to do. So in these interagency science discussions, we spent 4 months literally fighting about what we thought were the most important ones. These are compromises for ones that we think are both scientifically sound, but also management relevant. And so we pulled them together and then try and piece them out. There's a lot more metrics you could have had. You could put them in different ways. But this is our current best way of using it. And the idea is that if you focus on these and kind of follow that pillar structure, it gives an organization for how you can look at the different resources and goods we want from our landscape. So we're trying to do that hard work internally and then share it in a sort of more digestible format. And I know like Tadashi and Alan have been kind of and Pat have really also been in that sort of, in the trenches. I don't know if you have comments you want to add to that.
Well, so brass tacks, it's really helping folks make decisions on a regional level in the Sierra Nevada about what projects to prioritize or where to make investments. How do you, if you had a magic wand, how would this toolkit be utilized?
It's not on.
Yeah, just start off.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say that the toolkits are really designed to be, again, sort of a core set of data, right? And we tried to provide across all of the pillars a selection of data that would inform it, the questions that people might have, and provide them in a way that you can look at. I think we're providing both raw data as well as normalized data, so from on a scale from -1 to 1. So there's a little bit of analysis in there, but there's also the raw data, and then the ability for people to kind of look at that in conjunction. And I think that the google.org tool, the intent of that is to take that even a step further and allow people in a very user-friendly way to do all of that stacking and take the next step to try and understand how the resources are interacting with each other and where we could make decisions. I don't know if you guys have anything.
I'll just add really briefly that working with a number of collaboratives that I've had a pleasure of working with, information and how to represent it, how to interpret it, how to talk about it, how to come to consensus around what's the real situation and what do we want to do about it. That takes a lot of time, and it can take years to get those data to come together. So that's really, in a really practical sense, what this enables is to sort of jump right to like, hey, we've got a really reliable rendition of representation of conditions. What do we as a group want to do about that? And I think that really hopefully will help collaboratives and other groups come to a decision about what's best for them in those places, and then to move out on implementation. So that's really the main goal that we are hope for these kits.
So I just want to say thank you, because wow, integrating data across all these agencies, that's just a dream. So thank you guys for doing that. And I can only imagine, as you had said, John, the conversations that you guys have had, behind the scenes. So it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, and just so appreciated. And I can't wait to see how it's used, by our collaboratives, by our regions. I've already in the lobby just this morning, like, oh my gosh, are you going to make me do carbon counting on everything now? There's a lot of like, these pillars are in there, and is this a requirement that I have to use all of the pillars? Or do I have to go back and restructure my whole project to make sure that I have this included? And these are frameworks, I'm going to speak to the audience now, these are frameworks to be able to use. If this is something you want to know about, social importance in your area, you've got a tool set to be able to use. So I think my question is, how you can use any of these, you don't have to use all of them. And looking at you guys for that's how this was set up, is to be able to use these independently, but then collectively come together to really look at what you want to do in a landscape. Have I interpreted that correctly? Okay, got the head nods. Right. So I'm going to put that out there, guys. We're not requiring you to have to use all of it. It's built from your local level. What is important to your local groups? What do you want to know about?
Yeah, that's the key part, that you can prioritize and weight which pillars are important to each community. And that's really the flexibility that we're trying to build into it. And that's what's going to be built into the Planscape tool as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the level of resolution of the Planscape tool? I think Michelle had suggested that you guys designed this at an optimal level so for a resource, regional manager. And I know there are all sorts of technology tools that are also out there, some more focused on sort of the tactical, very localized level. So talk about the resolution and a little bit more on where you think the optimal use of Planscape is.
So we
have built this tool specifically to focus on, with a lot of the features in the tool, they're more aligned towards the landscape, the regional managers that are looking at broader landscapes. Although this could be used if needed by local planners. What we're working on is to make sure that the information, like the reports that come out of this, the shape files, PDFs, whatever needs to be shared, can be pulled into other tools and be used in other tools. We know that local planners, this is why one reason we focused on more the regional level, the local planners have a ton of tools at their disposal. And they have their favorite tools that they use, and they have a lot of things in their head as well. They really know, we talked to some of them, they really know their areas inside and out. So what we wanted to be able to do was cover that higher level for the regional planners, so that they could get that landscape view, and also to help address the million-acre challenge, which you've got to be able to be planning. You guys know better than we do. You've got to be planning at that broader level. But there's no reason why the data that comes out of that can't be used by local planners as well. Yeah. And that's our goal with the collaboration part of this, is to enable the planners to be able to come together collaboratively and work on this together, and start to bring some of those teams together to say, what's the best way for us to optimize for this particular landscape, and bring in feedback from multiple people. So hopefully that answered your question.
Really helpful, thank you. Other questions from our executive committee here?
Just a quick comment on your very first question. I mean, that audience is the audience for this. I think while it looks complicated, what we're hearing from all of you is extreme information overload. Tons of data, tons of metrics. And so if you are an RCD in the Bernie Hat Creek area or in Placer County, what we're hearing is, how do we assess the health of our forest? What metrics should we use? What we don't want is 20 different answers to that. How do you develop, as we talked about earlier, a statewide system where we're using consistent metrics, but one that is tailored to your area because you're weighting those metrics differently? So that's the sweet spot we're aiming for. But again, as John said, we want to hear from you. Does this work for you? Do the metrics capture what's important to you in your community? Is it user-friendly, as Google is attempting to do? We got a lot of work to do. This is the first time that we've unveiled this, so you're sort of our target guinea pigs to hear if this is hitting what you've told us is important.
Yeah, let's turn to Richard, and then we'll go to Stacy.
Yeah, great job. Really, congratulations to the team. Fantastic presentation. You talked a little bit about the data. I know a lot of work went into generating those regional resource kits, and really compiling a lot of data from a lot of different sources. And you also talked about, of course, that those data are going to need to be updated. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit to the process about currency around those data. How are they going to be updated? And are the updated data then going to be available for continued use? Thanks.
Yeah, who wants? We've talked a lot about that. Anybody want to jump in first?
I'll take the first stab. But the data that are in the kits represent 2021 conditions, so that's just so folks know that. And in terms of updating, one of the criteria that we focused on are data that are readily available and easily updated. So much of it is from remotely sensed sources like satellites, and so exactly how and when, I think, they will get updated. We tried to make that task as doable as possible in the set that was pulled together, and also because it really draws on the strengths of many different agencies. These data sources come from multiple sources, and they have their own workflows that incorporate updates into their workflows. So I do think, though, the kits themselves, in terms of being an entity, is fairly new, and so I think that some of the next work will be in this notion of alignment and collaboration, how those will be updated each year, ideally, so that they're current. I know, John, if you want to.
Well, I know that one of the real pleasures of working with Google is that was the first question they asked. They're making an investment. they want to know that these data that they're using now are going to be able to sustain this tool going forward. And so it really puts us, it makes it very clear that it's not a one-time investment. Right now, I think we're really harvesting, big investments both by federal and the state government to build these tools. And now we've built them, and we're going to see how well they work. And if they do work, there does need to be a plan to sustain them, both sustain the updating of them and also all the work that goes into this resource kit. Is a 1 year. We go through the regions, we start. It's we wanted to call these starter kits, but we changed the name. But that really is true. These are our start toward data integration and toward pulling the best available data, but it needs to continue, just like the treatments need to continue. And so we have to see, once we see how they work, then we need a plan to sustain them.
Great, thanks. And that actually answered one of my questions, so that's great. But and this may be more of a question actually for Patrick and for our task force leaders. How do you plan to use, I understand that this is aimed regionally at project planners, which is wonderful, but I also see, with all the grant funding available across multiple state departments and agencies, or perhaps even federal agencies, how do you see using this, to determine, to prioritize and determine? As a county person, there's a little bit of a fear, that it would that a lot of them it could continue to funnel grant funds to areas of the highest need and not necessarily spread things across the state. So maybe you could assuage some of those concerns.
We will certainly talk about that in the later part of the agenda. We want to be in a position of giving large block grants to areas that have their act together, that are ready to go, that have pipelines of projects. But we also want to, particularly at the state level, through the RFFC program, provide capacity building grants. And these toolkits are going to be key to that. So again, as I said earlier, you have a kit that you can use to hit the ground running. It's not going to take you, hopefully, a couple of years to try to figure out what metrics you should use, what decision support systems are out there. Now, having said that, and I can't emphasize this enough, we're not mandating or not planning the agencies to mandate any particular tool. If you want to prioritize projects giving your own systems, that's fine, but this also provides a common set of metrics so that statewide we can roll the information up. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot for local planning, local decision making, local priority setting, but using a common set of metrics so that we can evaluate success overall. But yes, as we'll talk about later, we hope to use this both for implementation funding to help hit high priorities, but even more importantly for capacity building, so people have the information they need to plan and prioritize projects.
Yeah, and Patrick, I'll just add to that. I mean, what we need to do, given the scale of the crisis, is move at a much larger scale at a faster pace. And we know that, the traditional programs we've had simply won't do that. This idea that individual communities develop individual competitive grants that get selected, one here, one there, across hundreds of communities across the state, we're just not going to achieve the targets that we have. So we have to move at a bigger scale at a faster pace. And Patrick's absolutely right. The goal is to help regions build their capacity. So that means still prioritizing community, but across regions. And so earlier this year, we were up at the North Coast, and the North Coast Resource Partnership has been doing this for 15, 20 years, really well organized, to identify regional priorities. And to Patrick's point, once regions build that capacity and can demonstrate that they've prioritized projects and have the sort of the process underway to do projects, multiple ones at a time, and develop and maintain a pipeline, then our goal is to provide state and I think federal funding for those priorities. But part of the challenge I've heard is that a lot of regions, it's challenging to develop that capacity and really identify the priorities and develop that big picture vision. And so this tool, among many others, is really meant to help them, so that, to Pat's point, not every region is creating its own wheel, that there are strong, reliable data sets that regions can use to set priorities. And then the goal is that then those priorities, like those in the Central Sierra where we're at right now, are identifying priorities, and then that federal state funding spigot gets turned on, and those projects can can take place, multiple ones at a time, and then we can, keep those projects moving forward. So maybe there's an initial treatment and then ongoing treatment, et cetera. That's, from our perspective, how we're going to actually achieve the pace and scale that we need to, and why these tools are so important. Good, Don.
Come sit here. Yeah, but
short cord and so hard to get the question out, I guess. First, I really appreciate the map-based approach to planning. As a person who likes to do these kind of things and nerd out on it sometimes, it's great to see new tools coming forward. The one question on my mind, and Alan and I have been having some of these conversations as well around some of this, is in terms of the localized type planning, how adaptable do you see this to be to include localized knowledge systems, such as like local winds or assets at risk that may not be readily available? And so it's just one question in that is like, how adaptable is that to be developed in that way? Thanks.
Yeah, I can give it a try. With our tool specifically, we're really hoping that local knowledge and some of the scientific knowledge can come together. So this is in no way like we want to replace local knowledge. I think it's really important. We're giving kind of maybe like a more landscape view on things. And then, as I was showing in the tool, it seems a lot of decisions are made collaboratively in person. So I think that's kind of the forum where I think two sources of knowledge can come together. And also, as we're making this tool collaborative, we could share this out so that there are more ways maybe to get comments, and then some of the local knowledge will be able to surface.
Yeah, I think we also have a commitment as we as we move through the regions to include regional information, particularly data. But I think Don, you brought up another question: is how do we include sort of some of this aspects that are important that are harder to quantify. I mean, you mentioned some of the sort of local wind patterns and local knowledge. I think some of the things around social cultural well-being are very difficult to quantify, and so this is a guide. It's not sort of going to give you the answer, and so we want to build in that flexibility. So have that sort of hard quantitative approach that gets built in with sort of local demands, local needs, local knowledge. And so we're trying to replace human thought in this. But we're very much realizing that we scientists and project developers and engineers need to get on board of getting things going fast and not wait till we have the perfect. We want to have something that informs and is good enough to make decisions.
And I'm really excited with the work that's happening, both John and Don, really braiding Western science with indigenous knowledge. And we are really at the cutting edge of this. So John, I think, as we look to integrate, sort of scientific data and sort of these Western scientific approaches, it's really important to try to, continue to figure out how we integrate indigenous knowledge into this and ensuring that it doesn't remain necessarily in silos, but is complementary of one another.
Yeah. No, I think we definitely have, a lot of work to do. We want to bring in. There's more agencies to bring in. There's more areas to bring in, and so we're hoping it grows. Although it is challenging to bring down all these silos. Anybody else have comments about? Yeah.
Before we move on, I just want to sort of make explicit a theme that I'm hearing from everybody else up on this panel and with you, is that one of our goals is to really meet people where they are. We realize there's a wide range of capacity out there, and that across this region, across the state, there are a variety of different interests and needs. And we're trying to build these data tools and resources to, if someone wants to take a deep dive, they can do that. If someone just wants to look in their specific area, they can do that. If they want to just look at a map and try to have that information just distilled in a very simple way, they can do that. And like I said, there's just this wide range of capacity, and so we need to provide a wide range of tools and products to meet that in order to help move all of this work forward across the state and the landscape.
Yeah, I would just add one more point, and that is to emphasize that these tools are all about empowering local leaders, regional leaders to identify what their priorities are. And we fail if this is a one-size-fits-all or a centrally planned activity and project selection from, the state capital or the federal capital. This is all about empowering folks like those that are here today and watching across the state. And so I think that's really the feedback that we invite is, are these tools helpful? Where can they be improved? And then really holding ourselves accountable for ensuring that the funding programs that we have really meet, again, to Alan's point, communities where they're at, so that we can get the resources in local and regional hands to get the work done. So Patrick, I'm sensing we're close to lunch. I hear some murmuring in the back of our fairgrounds hall here. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, what we can expect this afternoon and how it links to the conversation this morning, and then send us off with instructions for lunch?
Yeah, sure. So what you're going to hear early this afternoon is 3 areas, all in the Central Sierra, that got a head start, that have more funding, candidly, and collaborative efforts to educate you, to educate us on how they're using decision support tools, these mapping tools, these metrics to plan and prioritize projects, and also candidly showcase their efforts. As Jennifer and Wade said, we're moving towards block grants to large areas. You'll see 3 of those areas that are the benefits, in particular, Forest Service money under its 10-year plan. So you're going to hear how they're putting that money to use using this. We wanted to reassure you, these metrics aren't just out there developed by a bunch of researchers, but the actual practitioners on the ground, forest supervisors, are using them day to day. So we'll hear about that after lunch. Then we'll come back to this question of funding. How do we align state and federal funding to get this kind of work done, both on the implementation side and on the planning side, and end with a wrap up on recreation. So hopefully you'll see how it's all linked as we go through the rest of the day.